Good afternoon, everyone. Heather, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and also share that the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office has developed a new framework for how to use the Loan Program Office funds to support building owners to meet building performance standards. It's really a breakthrough for this work. Just to take a step back, I'm Heather Clark. I'm the Senior Director for the building sector for the Climate Policy Office at the White House. I oversee the White House's climate policy for the building sector. I have been working very closely for the last few months with the Loan Program Office on a strategy for implementing funds through their program to support building performance standards. The building performance standards are really a key strategy to cut building emissions and address the climate crisis. Many of you are very active with building performance standards, whether you're a city, a state, or a building owner trying to meet these standards. Building performance standards cut emissions, but they also help cut energy costs. They help improve health and also resiliency in the face of climate disaster. Almost 2 years ago, the president established the National Building Performance Standards Coalition, which today is made up of more than 40 cities and states who have either implemented or are in the process of implementing a building performance standard for their community. This ends up covering over 25% of the commercial buildings in the US. Today, we're going to talk about how the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office framework could be used to support building owners to meet building performance standards. To reduce the transaction costs and time, rather than funding individual building projects through the Loan Program Office, the idea is that cities, states, investment funds can apply for the funding through the Loan Program Office, and then those third parties can then create financial instruments through short, efficient transactions that will support individual building projects. It's going to be an exciting way to see more buildings meet these standards and achieve these goals. During today's workshop, you're going to hear from EPA and Department of Energy's Building Performance Standards Technical Network, which is available today to support cities and states who are implementing BPS. You're also going to hear from the National Building Performance Standards Coalition, which is made up of ambitious cities and states who are implementing BPS. Then you'll hear, most importantly, from the Loan Program Office. We'll describe the framework that is applicable for building performance standards. And then you're going to hear from NYSERDA and the City of New York, who are working with the Loan Program Office to develop building owner support for Local Law 97. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Building Performance Technical Assistance Network.
Thanks, Heather. Very nice to be here today. My name is Billy Ray Engelman. I work for the Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office. And as Heather mentioned, I'm here to showcase a bit about our Technical Assistance Network for Building Performance Standards. As Heather mentioned, ourselves at DOE, alongside our colleagues at the Environmental Protection Agency, have set up a technical assistance network to support jurisdictions across the country who are looking to explore, design, and adopt, and also implement building performance standards or similar policies that prompt improvements in a building. And this technical assistance network is free of cost, and it's open to those jurisdictions who are part of the National BPS Coalition and any other jurisdiction who's interested. On the screen, just a couple of examples of the different technical assistance that we offer, and we're very open to exploring all of the different opportunities and challenges that come with BPS. So please definitely check out our website there. I also wanted to highlight a couple of the federal funding opportunities that are coming out of our office, just for folks' awareness. The first came through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Funding Opportunity. And this encourages partnerships to accomplish energy code adoption and implementation, as well as innovative approaches like BPS. So this is open to any jurisdiction or third-party organizations as well. And then the second one, quickly, that I want to highlight is coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and that is the competitive funding for energy code activities. So similar to the first one, that covers innovative approaches such as building performance standards, and that's open to states, local jurisdictions, and territories across the U.S. So I'll drop a few of the links in the chat for folks to peruse at their leisure, but very nice to be here. Next, I'd like to introduce Rajiv Ravalapati from the Institute for Market Transformation. Thanks all.
Thanks, Billy Ray. And I think we're just waiting on the slide just to move on. There we go. I'll be brief because the main meat of today's agenda is talking about LPO and their generation of financing. So thanks for that introduction, Billy Ray. Again, I'm Rajiv Ravalapati. I'm with the Institute for Market Transformation, also known as IMT, and we are a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., focusing on equitable building decarbonization for existing buildings. I'm our Associate Director of Government Engagement. I am the de facto point of contact for IMT in regard to the National BPS Coalition. So IMT, my organization, acts as the manager of the state and local governments that are part of the National BPS Coalition. And this is something that Heather touched upon earlier, but it was launched in January of 2022. And to date, there has been a large growth of the number of jurisdictions that have joined the National BPS Coalition. There's over 40 to date, and there's a growing trend of what we're seeing of more states joining the coalition, as well as more states looking at BPS policies as part of their overall decarbonization and climate plan. So IMT works in tandem with the White House and with the DOE and EPA Technical Assistance Network, and we manage the governments within the coalition, as well as work with their communications on their joining of the actual coalition. And there is a dedicated website. It's located right there on the screen, but also make sure to drop it in the chat, but it is the nationalbpscoalition.org. You can go to the next slide. This map, I just quickly want to highlight, it's a little different from the one that Billy Ray just showed, but this map right here highlights the state of building performance standards across the country, as well as gives you an overview of who those governments are that are part of the National BPS Coalition as of December 2023. And today there are 13 policies, 13 past BPS policies around the country, and you'll see that there are 4 states included: Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Maryland. And we're seeing more and more jurisdictions continue to accelerate the adoption or planning of a BPS in the coming years. You can go to the next slide. And so I won't read the full text on here, but this is when you visit the National BPS Coalition, or if you are a mayor, a governor, or a county executive, or you represent that government, and you're curious on what that commitment is to the National BPS Coalition, this is what it is. But I've bolded here a key sentence within that commitment where, as joining the coalition, you will identify and act on prerequisites for building performance standards or other complementary policies and work to advance that legislation or regulation with the goal of adoption by Earth Day 2024. And that was the first cohort of jurisdictions within the National BPS Coalition. And soon we'll be rolling out an announcement of states and governments that are going to be joining as part of a second cohort with a new deadline of achieving this commitment by Earth Day 2026. And if you're curious on what these kind of prerequisites include, if you are a government that doesn't see yourself adopting a BPS anytime soon, things like a utility data access law at the state level, electrification laws, adopting the latest version of the building energy code, clean heat standards, all of those things. Oh, and setting up a high performance building hubs. Those all can meet the prerequisites for committing and joining the National BPS Coalition. So now is a great time if those are the things that your state or government is working towards as we speak. And then you can go to the last slide. So again, We appreciate the opportunity to talk about the National PPS Coalition. Again, I'm Rajiv. I'm with IMT, our Associate Director of Government Engagement. If you are a government that wants to learn more about what it means to join the coalition and the process, as well as working with your communication teams to highlight and celebrate your joining of the coalition, here's my contact information for you all to provide. And next, I will hand it over to Hans and Elizabeth with LPO, who will be able to talk more in depth about the next generation of financing that LPO's office is offering in order to work with those clean energy projects that have to meet these kind of targets across the country.
All right. Well, Rajiv, thank you so much. And Heather Clark, I want to thank you for your leadership and bringing us together today in this important webinar. My name's Hans Reamer, and I'm with the Loan Programs Office, where I lead the state and local engagement team, working with states across the country on how LPO can be a financing resource for their clean economy, clean energy goals. And I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Elizabeth Bellis-Wolfe. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Hans. Elizabeth Bellis-Wolfe here. I help coordinate our virtual power plant and state-supported transactions here at LPO for the past almost 3 years now, and have a history working in building projects from residential to commercial, and working with the state. So looking forward to sharing with you some of our ideas today about how to work together.
Terrific. So let's begin. Next slide. Loan Programs Office. We are a lending authority at the Department of Energy, and we are the premier public financing partner working to accelerate high-impact energy and manufacturing investments to advance America's economic future. There are several hundred of us that work for the Loan Programs Office, actually around the country, and we provide very attractive financing for large, high-impact transformational projects. As you're going to hear more about a little bit later, our projects are large. They tend to be more than $100 million, and there's no statutory maximum. We're financing large-scale nuclear facilities. And we have tens of billions of dollars of available financing for projects that are partnered with the private sector and, as you'll hear, with the public sector. We have multiple loan authorities. So today we're going to be really drilling into Title 17 and 1703, but please note, we have a tribal loan authority. We have a advanced technology vehicles manufacturing loan authority. We have an energy infrastructure loan authority. So there are many other important programs that we have that we'd like to talk to you about as well. Next slide. LPO, we are working across the array of sectors that are part of the new clean energy economy. And you'll find us working to support projects in automobiles and charging, and as mentioned, nuclear power, virtual power plants, transmission, tribal energy. Wherever there is innovation and large projects, there's an intersection with LPO, and we have subject matter experts who work with companies, for the most part, to help finance their projects and work them through the application process. Next slide. Just a few points about our impact. We are creating jobs. There are, so far, nearly 50,000 permanent jobs have been created by LPO finance projects, producing more than 100 million megawatt hours of clean energy, supporting more than 20 million advanced vehicles, technology vehicles. So just a deep array across many sectors and contributing significantly to the new clean economy. Next slide. All right, so today we are drilling into building projects and how the Loan Programs Office is potentially a resource for building projects that are improving the energy efficiency in buildings. I'm going to start with just a brief high-level observation or comment that, yes, LPO can be a resource to support building sector projects, particularly when those projects are seeking to achieve targeted goals, such as building performance standards, which we've heard about today, or other important policies the forthcoming national definition for a zero emissions building, for example. LPO also has important limitations that we're going to walk through today. And so understanding how our financing can be a resource is really, really important. And you're going to see why we believe that our financing really is most likely to be used to support energy work on a portfolio of buildings. So not helping necessarily to renovate one building, but rather across multiple buildings for a variety of reasons. Projects that we finance must be based in the US. They must reduce greenhouse gases. They must have a reasonable prospect of repayment. And sometimes if they don't, well, if they must use innovative technology, or they must have a meaningful financial investment from what we'll call a state energy financing institution. All right, now I'm going to pass it to Elizabeth for a deep dive on our lending terms.
Thanks, Hans. You can go to next slide. So let's talk in a bit more detail now about the nature of the support that LPO provides for a project. LPO can work together with the Federal Financing Bank at the US Treasury to provide a guaranteed loan directly to a project. If you choose this option, we handle that interface with the Federal Financing Bank for you. You don't have to fill out two different applications. However, LPO can also guarantee a loan made by an eligible third-party lender, like a traditional lender that you may be working with on your projects who might be having challenges making these projects work and pencil. In either case, the LPO guaranteed loan can't be subordinated to other financing in the structure. And LPO also generally requires a senior security interest in the relevant collateral. This slide covers some of the key legal limitations on terms of an LPO supported loan. But rather than reading all of the information on this slide to you, a note about how to think about these figures. It's rare that actual LPO supported loans have terms that go to the absolute maximum or minimum that we're legally allowed to do. It's important to understand that what is realistic for a particular project is going to depend on the facts and circumstances of that project, and may be more conservative than the legal limitations that we're laying out on this slide. For example, LPO can support up to 80% of the eligible costs of a given project, but it might represent only 50 to 70% of the capital stack on many projects that it supports. Similarly, LPO can provide support for as long as 30 years, very long tenor projects, but it's not uncommon for our loan tenors to range in the 15-year window. For more information about loan pricing, including interest rates, risk-based charges, and costs and fees, the best place to look is our recently published blog post on pricing from our Chief Investment Officer, Chris Creed. So we'll put the link here for you. And we also did talk through that a bit on a recent webinar we did on projects in schools, if you'd just like to hear the voiceover, so we can include that chat as well. So let me turn it back to Hans now to tell you more about the different loan programs that might be relevant for your BPS projects.
All right, next slide. As mentioned, we have Title 17, Section 1703 for innovative energy projects. So if your building project is going to deploy an innovative technology, perhaps a virtual power plant technology, you may be eligible for LPO financing based on our determination that indeed your technology is innovative. So we have a technical team that will assess the innovative status of your project. So building projects that have an innovative technology can come apply on that basis. Next slide. We also have the authority to provide loans, loan guarantees for projects that do not have an innovative technology, using commercialized or maybe off-the-shelf technology, so to speak. We can do that now thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law and the funding in the Inflation Reduction Act. We can do that when there is an investment in that project, a meaningful investment from what we call a state energy financing institution, or SEFI. A SEFI is a state agency or quasi-public agency that supports energy projects, that makes investments in energy projects. So we have a whole process that we do to review the statutory authority, the programmatic history of a state agency. But I want to refer you to our blog on SEFIs, S-E-F-I, where you'll see a lot of information about the kinds of state agencies: housing, economic development, green bank, energy office. A lot of different kinds of state agencies or quasi-public agencies could be SEFIs. So if you're a building projects, a building portfolio owner, and you want to consider a strategy, you want to think either about an innovative technology or how to partner with a state agency to invest in your project. And we'll hear a lot more about SEFIs today from one of our leading SEFIs. Next slide. So we have the authority to lend to projects when those projects are utilizing technologies in our eligible technology areas. So we have 13 eligible technology areas. They're listed on this slide. Lots more information about these on our website, but important point to remember. Next slide. Because again, in order to be eligible, the project needs to utilize those. We thought relevant technology areas would certainly be renewable energy systems, efficient energy, end-use energy technologies, energy storage. But the second important factor here is that we have a limitation around eligible costs, and we can't finance many things that a building owner might want to do to a building. We can finance the costs that are necessary, reasonable, customary, and directly related to the energy technology, the technology that we're financing. So working with us will be a matter of filtering through the senior debt requirement, the minimum loan size, the eligible technology, and then the eligible costs. And working through that, there is a strong use case, but you're going to need to work through that, and we're here to talk to you about that. Next slide.
Thanks, Hans. So I'm going to cover two types of projects, each with some variations. First, on this slide, we have a project where the work being done to bring buildings into compliance with building performance standards is being financed as part of a green mortgage on the building as a whole, or on the buildings as a whole, respectively. A lead lender or an aggregator is pulling together a large pipeline portfolio of these green mortgages. There's an entity form that will own or acquire some or all of the mortgages and or the receivables in respect of the mortgages, perhaps the subset that relates to the energy portion. The applicant has demonstrated that the project will be deploying a new or significantly improved innovative technology. So in this example, we don't have a SEFI on the page. This is a straight innovative project. The borrower is adequately capitalized to provide at least 20% of the project costs, the eligible project costs that we can support as equity. Now, while there may be some siloing of collateral into groups, cross-collateralization is expected within the LPO-supported project. So that's part of the reason that I've sketched it out this way. And as discussed previously, the borrower could be requesting that the LPO guarantee debt provided to it by a third party, or requesting debt directly from the federal financing bank, or some combination of those. You might see a back-to-back structure, right, where there's federal financing bank and third-party lenders in different places. I think we can go to the next slide. So this is the same project, but just layering in the concept of a SEFI providing support for the project. Here we might have building performance standard work that really isn't innovative. There's not enough of a common innovative component across the portfolios. We're looking at commercialized efficiency improvements to the buildings. So here we need to see meaningful support from our SEFI, and that's coming in upstairs on this particular chart as either equity or mezzanine debt. And just to be clear, there are many ways that a SEFI could provide meaningful support. This is just one of them to sort of show how it would fit into this structure. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. In this example, we've got a project where instead of there being a sort of including the cost in a mortgage, there's really a standalone energy project being developed here. So here there is an energy services agreement, a power purchase agreement, energy performance contract, something of that nature that is entered into between building owner and the energy developer. And the energy developer has to get the capital to actually do the improvements in that circumstance. And so they come to LPO either for a direct loan from the Federal Finance Bank or to guarantee a third-party loan that they've identified with one of their lending partners. Here, it's important to understand that you're going to see a higher portion of the costs that are likely to be eligible, right? Because you've already isolated the energy costs from the portion of the mortgage that really relates to the acquisition of real estate or other costs that are unlikely to be eligible. However, the structure is a little bit different because really we have a pool that's limited to those energy costs. One thing I wanted to flag that I meant to mention on the other slide as well is when we're guaranteeing a third-party debt, we can only guarantee a maximum of 90% of that third-party debt. Whereas if there is a federal financing bank loan in the structure, we can guarantee up to 100% of that obligation. In either case, though, the obligation that we're guaranteeing cannot represent more than 80% of the eligible project costs involved in the project. And that's those energy-related costs that Hans was mentioning earlier that contribute to the achievement of the building performance standard and are necessary and related to an eligible category. So all of that plays into the question of why are we suggesting that building portfolios are probably the way. When we look at the costs of engaging with LPO, we find that if you're talking about a project that might be, say, $100 million each project, but only some portion of that is eligible for LPO support, you're going to need to have more than one of those kind of grouped together, right, to get to the scale where it really makes sense for you to engage and think about the transaction cost involved in working with us. So I hope this is helpful as a very high-level sketch of how we might work together. I think you're going to see some additional sketches from some of the state and local participants later in the call, and we're happy to also take questions and discuss ideas with you all one-on-one on that. So let me turn back to Hans to dive in a little bit more on some of the additional LPO requirements that are applicable regardless of which of these types of approaches you might take.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Next slide.
Oh, I forgot to mention, this is, sorry, one more. This is just the same project with a CEFI. So again, you can see there's not much difference in what's contemplated here, right? There's a pledge of receivables in respect of the energy contract. But here, instead of just having a private energy developer providing all its own capital, it's received support from a CEFI, and that might have been at the developer level. It might be lower down in the structure at the project level. But there we've just layered on an additional box. Either one, we're excited about working with both the innovative projects and the CEFI supported projects. So I hope that's helpful.
That is very helpful. And for those, actually, if we could just, well, for those policymakers out there with state governments or private sector leaders who are working with state governments on their projects, that's a model. That's a model to consider. Okay, additional LPO requirements. Projects that LPO finances are required to comply with the Davis-Bacon Act. So that is a prevailing wage law, which reporting involves weekly reporting, usually using electronic payroll. So you need some significant business capacity there. When the borrower is a nonprofit or the government, then there is a compliance requirement with provisions of the Build America, Buy America Act. So that's an important consideration. Projects that we finance are also subject to the Cargo Preference Act, which affects the goods that are brought in for the project. One of the important requirements that we work with is NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, Protection Act. And projects need to comply with NEPA. All projects need to comply with NEPA. Now, the good news for a building project that is retrofitting an existing building is there is eligibility for a categorical exclusion for existing facilities. So in your application, you would certainly pursue that. If you are breaking ground, that hasn't previously been disturbed, you're going to need to build in some significant timeline for NEPA compliance. These are all the issues we work with you, of course, very closely on in your application process. Additionally, the federal support restrictions. So a project cannot utilize other federally appropriated funds in the financing of the project. So if you have a significant grant from DOE, that's really going to rule out financing that same project from the Loan Programs Office, just as an example, or a HUD financing. However, tax credits that a project is otherwise eligible for are okay. So the new tax credits around clean energy and related tax credits can be utilized. So that's important. Next slide. All right, brief comment on our application process. It takes, a year, give or take. It depends on the complexity of your process and of your project and how firm you are in what you want to do. So it's not a quick process, but usually it's for a very significant loan. So it's appropriate. We work through significant stages of diligence, beginning with pre-application consultations, and we're here to work with you. It's important to note we are a lending institution, but we're one guided by public policy and public benefit. And our goal is not to, foreclose on your project and make our money that way. Our goal is for you to succeed, and we're here as an expert resource to you achieving state goals and federal goals. Next slide. All right, we've shared a variety of links in the Q&A. Refer you to those. Please do click on those. A lot of blogs and some other presentations. One of the blogs on our website is the top 10 questions that projects should consider. It's just a good example of the kinds of important criteria that you're going to want to work through as you consider applying. But next slide. Please know we're here. Unlike a federal agency where once a grant opportunity is announced, there's kind of a wall, you can't get their help. We're here to help you. We're here to provide feedback on your concept and then to work with you in an iterative manner on your project so that we can get the best assessment of your ability to repay and you'll have the best prospect for success. So thank you. Really appreciate the audience being with us today and our terrific partners who we'll now turn to. I'm really delighted to be able to pass the mic to Joe Chavez from the City of New York, which is providing great leadership in building performance standards. Joe.
Hi, thank you, Hans. I'm Joe Chavez. I'm the Deputy Director for Resilient and Efficient Buildings at the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Also from the city, I'm joined by Jamie Horton. Jamie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, thanks, Joe. Hi, Jamie Horton. I'm Director of Special Projects at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and I work on a number of climate finance initiatives in coordination with Joe and the Mayor's Office for Climate and Environmental Justice.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to be talking about New York City's building performance standard, Local Law 97, and provide some of the challenges and opportunities that we're facing as we move into the first implementation phase of the law that started this year in 2024. So Local Law 97 was passed in 2019 as part of the Climate Mobilization Act. And the law was designed so that there would be a period to help prepare for the law. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit and we kind of lost those years. So we have now started compliance in 2024 and are quickly catching up to make sure that building owners have the resources that they need. The law is expected to drive emissions reduction from 50,000 large buildings and put them on a path towards carbon neutrality for 2050. Local Law 97 remains New York City's most important climate initiative, It's expected to deliver many benefits to the city, such as avoided hospitalizations and premature deaths from improved air quality, significantly expand New York City's green economy, creating new jobs and an active market for innovative technologies, all while providing cost savings to New Yorkers through improved efficiency in their buildings. Next slide, please. Implementing this law is not without its challenges, of which there are many. As the emissions limits get more stringent over time, most buildings will require intensive capital improvements, which will be both costly and in some cases technically challenging. Owners are facing high borrowing costs and are reluctant to remortgage or take on more debt to finance these retrofits. So these are just some of the challenges that we're seeing and looking for solutions for. Next slide. To address these challenges, we released a plan, Getting 97 Done, last September. Getting 97 Done is a multi-pronged plan to mobilize buildings and the market for compliance with Local Law 97. Components of the plan include targeting existing and upcoming incentive programs to Local Law 97 efforts, leveraging city tax abatements to cover retrofit work that reduces emissions and improves building efficiency, convening a council of stakeholders that include owners and managers, workforce development organizations, and funding and financing organizations to provide the city with on-the-ground insight into the challenges and opportunities buildings are facing with compliance, and enhancing our New York City Accelerator program. This is the city's free program for building owners that provides them with free technical assistance and guidance, and now specifically to help comply with Local Law 97. Next slide. One key finding from our analysis when we were putting together the Getting 97 Done plan is that compliance challenge will vary by building and by sector. Looking at 2030, when the emissions limits will get much more stringent and we're expecting about 63% of buildings to be out of compliance, the majority of those buildings out of compliance are going to be multifamily buildings. Also worth noting is that multifamily buildings are significantly over their, or of the buildings that are significantly over their limits by 50% or more. These include a greater percentage of buildings located within New York State designated disadvantaged communities. And this highlights a need to target resources towards buildings with the most vulnerable populations. Next slide. We estimated that the cost for buildings to comply with Local Law 97 would be between $14 and $17 billion, of which $5 to $6 billion could be repaid in energy savings from the improved efficiency of the buildings. But this still leaves a significant gap of costs that for most building owners makes compliance still very challenging. Next slide. If we add in incentives from the state utilities and the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, we can see that with multifamily buildings, the gap closes to a point where the cost of compliance is lower than the cost of doing nothing and paying the penalties out to 2050. But for commercial buildings, it looks a little bit different, where the present value of penalties out to 2050 will likely still be lower than the cost of compliance, even after taking advantage of incentives and energy savings. So this has led us to believe that there's a greater opportunity in targeting our incentives towards multifamily buildings during this lead up to 2030. Because if we can get it right, those buildings are more likely to actually do the work because it makes more financial sense for them to do it. Next slide. So if we look at just the cost for multifamily buildings, we're still looking at almost $10 billion in upfront costs between now and 2030. If we break this down, we can understand where the limited amount of resources that we have can be most useful. And so we can see buildings that are just less than 20% over their limits probably don't have a lot of work to do to get into compliance by 2030. And so that separates out about 3,000 buildings where they can finance this work more easily. Maybe they have reserves or can pass through costs much more easily to be able to cover that work. That leaves a remaining 8,600 some buildings that are over their limits more significantly and will need to do much more capital intensive retrofits to meet compliance. If we separate those buildings out into those that are affordable multifamily buildings and those within state disadvantaged communities and those that are market rate and not within state disadvantaged communities, we can look at the type of resources that are best needed for these types of buildings. And so thankfully, we have the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which will be providing capital and will hopefully be directed towards affordable multifamily buildings and buildings within state disadvantaged communities, and will provide the financing needed for those buildings to cover these costs. But that still leaves our market rate buildings and buildings that are not in disadvantaged communities with a hefty $4.5 billion where we need to find financing to help these owners make compliance affordable. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Horton, who's going to talk a little bit more about the engagement that we're doing with our stakeholders to help solve this problem of financing.
Thanks, Joe. If we could move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as Joe mentioned, a major part of the implementation plan for Local Law 97 is the creation of 3 mobilization councils focused on building owners and managers, workforce, and then funding and financing. And so the Funding and Financing Mobilization Council is really composed of a cross-section of the different stakeholders that are going to be needed to actually implement a lot of these building decarbonization projects. So we have traditional lenders, we have specialty lenders, policymakers, and incentive providers. And so what this allows the city to do is really interface with the folks that are kind of on the ground, not just for ongoing feedback, but also for help in developing some of the financing solutions that are going to be needed, because even when there's a clear payback associated with some of these improvements, you still need building owners will still need access to capital to actually implement. And so this Funding and Financing Mobilization Council will provide a ongoing venue for us to engage with industry. And then if we go to the next slide, we are also, and EDC is leading this, we've stood up a separate kind of more targeted task force with mortgage lenders. We are meeting through the summer to really kind of deep dive on some of the particulars of some of the challenges that are really upfront and kind of central to making this financing available. So digging into building level underwriting, how to incorporate fines, how to incorporate kind of the savings from some of the different building decarbonization measures that are going to be required under Local Law 97, but also working directly with some of the lenders to start to get their arms around exactly what this looks like for their portfolios. It's obviously much more impactful looking at beyond just the building level, but at the portfolio lender level for some of these mortgage lenders in New York City. And so we'll be sharing some of these findings over the summer, and then the goal is to continue developing this work with the ongoing Mobilization Council. And a big piece of this task force is looking at the potential for kind of silver bullet solutions to really increase the amount of capital available for the work associated with Local Law 97, and one of those is looking at the LPO's products that Elizabeth walked through. And so the key part of that is our partnership with NYSERDA. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to John Joshi from NYSERDA, who will talk about what they're doing to increase access to the LPO.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. This is John Joshi. I'm a Director for Financing Solutions at NYSERDA. NYSERDA, for those who don't know, is the New York State Energy Research Development Authority. My focus is on climate finance for decarbonization solutions, especially for disadvantaged communities and the built environment. On this webinar, the presenters before me have shared information on policy and programs, all oriented toward decarbonization solution and the clean economy. In the next few slides, I'll cover some basic ideas covering the threshold question. Why engage in CEFI programs from a practitioner's and stakeholder perspective? With the most basic question being, why a CEFI approach can make sense. So we've heard from LPO on the CEFI approach, and Elizabeth and Han covered some financial structures and requirements to participate in a CEFI program. Joe and Jamie have shared high-level goals that New York City is targeting for building decarbonization. The key issue being climate mitigation is a big lift and requires a lot of resources and collaboration, requiring a combination of policy mechanism, low-cost capital, and increased public-private collaboration to deliver the impact benefits. From a stakeholder perspective, the CEFI carve-out under the IRA unlocks access to billions in concessional financing from the Department of Energy. Participation by qualifying CEFI entities can leverage their limited concessionary capital to drive multiples of private financing capital, achieving upwards 20 times or more capital leverage in the market. With the CEFI approach and LPO financing with a sovereign guarantee allows the lowest cost of capital to replace expensive forms of debt financing, allowing more projects to pencil out. Example. We've seen firms that are focused on consumer efficiency solutions, where their blended cost of capital range from 10 to 13%. This is very expensive capital for customer solutions. With the CEFI approach, the capital cost could be as low as sub 6% for senior debt. And be mindful of the fact that it can take more than a year or so for a CEFI solution to go through the LPO process. And with the Fed policy as is poised for cutting rates, we could be seeing a far lower threshold for senior debt going down the future. The key impact value of CEFI approach allows the long tenured capital, potentially up to 30 years, subject to risk-based review. This can help increase business opportunities across the value chain. The key to getting project done is access to low-cost, long-dated capital. This is a unique alignment of a public-private partnership and policy goals to drive solutions. Next slide, please. Just to shift some gears, NYSERDA has issued an RFP, a PON, we call it a PON on our side, with CEFI investment support. So NYSERDA is serving as a qualified CEFI. For firms looking to tap the LPO program guarantee and use the CEFI carve-out for a waiver, firms can apply under our PON 5456. NYSERDA approach supports national portfolios with the percentage share of portfolio in New York. NYSERDA can support many forms to support a capital stack, from pari passu to LPO, subordinate debt, as well as a loan loss reserve approach. Basic eligibility guidance requirement applies outlined here, and we've included in the appendix a subset of qualifying technologies for NYSERDA CEFI support, and a link to the program docs is below. The next few slides cover slightly simplified diagrams of the CEFI process, similar to what Elizabeth shared, but in a more of a CEFI 101 approach. Next slide, please. So these slides are just, we've added these as an appendix just so that people have an easier one-on-one review of the timeline and the approach. Next slide, please. So this is a simplified timeline to help you frame the CEFI journey from preparation to development. The key point is that the CEFI approach is a collaborative process. So keep LPO and the CEFI agency engaged as you work toward a deployment strategy. Next slide, please. The LPO team, Elizabeth shared slides on the various structures. This is a very simplified approach. The basic takeaway is that the senior debt has U.S. sovereign guarantee, which allows for low-cost capital. That's the driver that's needed in the market. Being able to have high-level debt, sovereign guarantee that can be sub 6% will drive a lot more projects into the market. Next slide, please. This example of various capital stacks offers a quick visual. From the left side, a higher cost of capital, that stack. In the middle, a SEFI with SEFI without the LPO, and then on the right with SEFI with LPO. The value proposition by taking the SEFI journey and approach, again, the basic takeaway is that the senior debt has U.S. sovereign guarantee that allows low-cost capital to provide solutions so more projects can be financed. Next slide, please. Here we've shared with you if you're interested in a NYSERDA approach, and we're working with lots of different firms across the value chain, looking at many different solutions. These are the technologies, which is a subset of what Hans had shared in the broader 1703 program we're currently supporting under this RFP. We look forward to connecting with you. Next slide, please. Thanks to all the teams for their presentation. Thank you, and handing it back to Hans and the LPO team.
All right. I don't know if my network connection is going a little fritzy, but thank you, John, and thank you to NYSERDA for your ongoing leadership. And there are several questions in the chat. We will really only be able to answer in the most limited way. First, I'll say, reach out to us through our website. We have a pre-application consultation form there, and you can fill that out. It will come to us, and we can set up a call with you. You can also email us directly at lpo@hq.doe.gov, or SEFI, SEFI, at hq.doe.gov. A few questions we can try to speak to, but understand that definitive answers for questions always come based on really a thorough understanding of the facts, and it's not easy to respond in real time. But a question was asked about NEPA and whether a SEFI could get a categorical exclusion. The NEPA process follows the project, so any project has to have the NEPA evaluation. If the SEFI were to create a special purpose vehicle that had projects of a certain type, there would be a NEPA evaluation of those projects, and then future projects that match that might have kind of a more efficient way of going through that process. Utilizing, if there were one provided, a categorical exclusion, for example, for certain kinds of projects. So there is certainly, but a NEPA decision doesn't pass to the SEFI for anything it wants to do. It's a lot tighter than that.
That's right. I might just add that sometimes we do see folks defining the scope of their project and requesting a review with respect to that scope in a way that, oh, apologies, somebody's calling my computer, in a way that gives sort of confidence with respect to a broader group where we're talking about projects in existing buildings. That's not always possible for projects that aren't just in existing buildings. So it is a bit of a different process. But I think we do have a way for this type of project to give a fair amount of clarity pretty early on, as compared to projects that involve new construction or greenfield.
Just to reference one of the questions about, well, okay, what if I'm a building owner out there, but there isn't a set of other buildings that I immediately
Love
know
that
about.
question.
Yeah, great question. Well, there's lots of different ways you could go, but one thing I wanted to highlight is that a multi-state strategy is also a possibility here. You know, CEFIs can work together to finance a pool that together provides meaningful support across all the projects that would benefit from that CEFI-backed fund. So that is certainly a possibility. Or of course, you know, perhaps there are partners you can work together with to create your portfolio and then create a special purpose vehicle for your portfolio and then apply on that basis. Elizabeth, what might you?
Yeah, and I would just add, I think this is a role where we're seeing increasing interest in providing that kind of ecosystem support from the sort of state and city entities, like some of the folks that were on the call today, in thinking through how do they help support that aggregation ecosystem. So I would encourage you, if you're in that situation, to reach out to your sort of equivalent of a NYSERDA or a New York City Economic Development Corporation, and because there may be a task force or an effort that would help you with a little bit of that matchmaking, or a program that you're going to be able to join that might be under development right now. And hopefully there'll be more of them after this webinar.
The question has been asked if REITs are allowed to participate and apply.
That's a great question. I don't know offhand. That's one we'll have to take offline. Similar question for TVA, federal utilities. Those are very fact specific, so we'll need to follow up on those. I do see a question on domestic content waivers under Build America, Buy America, and just wanted to touch on that. So when there is a CEFI that is the direct borrower, because they are a not-for-profit, they are not exempt from Build America, Buy America, the way that most of our projects with private sector entities are not in the same category. There is, my understanding is there is a process by which one can request a waiver. I have not yet seen it pursued by any applicant. So while there is a theoretical process, but I can't tell you much more about it than that at this stage. But happy to dive into that with an applicant for whom that's relevant. And then, another follow-up was on whether the Fannie Freddie financing precludes LPO financing. Again, obviously very facts and circumstances dependent, but we asked a question related to projects that get mortgage insurance from Fannie and Freddie entities previously. And the framework that we were told is to think about whether or not the project is simply taking advantage of a generally available benefit that happens to be federally funded, but is not specific to the project, such as a grant or a another award. That those sort of generally available products that happen to receive indirect federal support are more likely to be acceptable. So it's not a hard no or a hard yes, but it's not a don't come to us if your project is planning on having interaction with the GSEs.
Question has been asked about where to access these presentation. We're going to create a page for this webinar. There'll be a video recording. The goal will be to have all the presentations available. Also want to encourage you to sign up for LPO newsletters, as well as the partners who have presented today. We have a state and local newsletter as well, where we will more frequently focus just on those set of issues. So please do sign up for the various newsletters from the entities involved. Okay, why don't we call it a day. Thank you so much again, Heather Clark and the White House Office of Climate Policy and New York City, NYSERDA, the BPS Coalition. This is very informative and I hope helpful. Right. Signing off.